Pedró Lopez. Pedro Alonso Lopez, a tall man with a peculiar appearance, a large nose, no upper front teeth, and a cheek scar, was born in Colombia during a scary time full of fighting between political groups that people called La Violencia, or the violence. His father got killed in a surprise attack just months before the birth while trying to protect a nearby place, so his mother had to raise Pedro and his many brothers and sisters all by herself. He said she forced him out of the house when he was only 8 after she caught him touching his sister in a wrong way. From then on, he lived without a home, just walking the streets alone, and during that tough time, he was used many times, started doing drugs, and had problems with the law when police caught him stealing a car, which led to him doing 7 years in prison only 2 days after arriving there. 4 other prisoners are him, but he kept quiet about it and instead built a knife from random scraps to kill 3 of them over the following 2 weeks, which prison leaders viewed as self-defense to protect his life, though they still added 2 extra years to his time. When he finally left prison, he began traveling across South America, and that's when he started his murders. He picked young girls as targets, killing them slowly, sometimes taking up to 15 minutes. Then, in Peru, local native people caught him attempting to kidnap a 9-year-old girl from her village, so they beat him severely, removed his clothes, and buried him in sand up to his neck, intending a slow death and even pouring syrup on him for ants to devour. But an American missionary who spread religious teachings convinced them to hand him to police instead, and the authorities simply sent him out of the country to Ecuador without any charges. In Ecuador, he continued killing, and police noticed many girls disappearing, but assumed it involved human trafficking rather than murders. In 1980, though, he tried to take another child, but market leader Carolina Roman pursued and seized him, shouting that he sold kids while the crowd beat him and delivered him to police, who released him shortly after. April brought massive floods near Ambato that uncovered 4 strangled girls' bodies, pushing police to investigate seriously once more. And just 3 days later, Pedro approached a 12-year-old, but she informed her mother, which was, incredibly, Carolina Roman. She yelled, clutched him, and had merchants detain him until police arrived for a permanent arrest. He stayed silent initially under questioning, yet after weeks in a cell with an undercover officer acting as a fellow inmate, he confessed to over 100 killings in Ecuador alone, plus others in Colombia and Peru, for a claimed total exceeding 300. He explained how he occasionally unearthed bodies for imaginary tea parties and stated his motive stemmed from losing his childhood innocence early, so he aimed to strip it from girls too. Police doubted him until he guided them to graves, revealing 53 bodies of girls aged 8 to 13 in a forest area. An Ambato court convicted him of 57 murders, imposing 16 years as Ecuador's maximum. Then he faced knife attacks from inmates, prompting extra guard protection, and despite pushes to extend his stay, good behavior earned him an early release in 1994. He labeled himself the man of the century in a chat, and police transported him secretly at night to Colombia's border, as they feared vigilantes, because victim families offered bounties up to $25,000 for his death. Upon arriving in Colombia without an initial warrant, they placed him under watch in a hotel. Later, a new warrant was issued for another murder, and while he was being transported by van, about 2,000 furious people ambushed the vehicle, forcing the authorities to detour to Bogota for safety. Examining doctors noted personality problems but not enough mental illness for therapy, and by 1998, once deemed sane, he gained release on low bail of about $70 if he reported regularly and saw a therapist, but he fled immediately. From then, we just have unverified sightings in Ecuador, including a visit to his poor mother for cash that she refused, leading him to steal and sell her mattress and chair before vanishing. The police issued warrants in 2002 for a new murder case that seemed similar to earlier ones, and they also investigated possible links in 2012, but none of those leads went anywhere. The Freeway Phantom. On an ordinary evening, a 13-year-old girl left her home in southeast Washington, D.C. to buy groceries. She never came back. 6 days later, her body was found without shoes on a grassy hill beside I-295 behind St. Elizabeth's Hospital. She had been sexually assaulted and killed. No one knew it yet, but Carol was the first victim of a man who would soon be known as the Freeway Phantom. A few months later, a 16-year-old disappeared while walking to her summer job. Witnesses saw her getting into an old black car with a man driving, but no one got the license plate number. 11 days later, her body was found only 15 feet from where the first girl's body had been discovered. The killer had chosen almost the same spot, as if to taunt investigators. Again, she was fully dressed but missing her shoes. Then came 10-year-old Brenda Faye Crockett. She went to the store and never came home. And that night, her family received 2 terrifying phone calls. Brenda was crying and saying a man had picked her up and that she was in a cab heading home. Then, in the second call, she asked, "Did my mother see me?" and said she was alone in a house with that white man. During that call, heavy footsteps could be heard in the background. Then she said, "I'll see you," and hung up. Hours later, a hitchhiker found her body. Police believe the phone calls were staged and that Brenda had been forced by her killer to make them in order to confuse investigators. Then, after yet another murder, the press gave the killer his name, the Freeway Phantom. The next victim was different in some ways, though 18-year-old Brenda Denise Woodard had dinner with a friend and caught a bus home around 11:30 p.m. The next morning, her body was found near the Baltimore-Washington Parkway. She had been stabbed and strangled, but this time, she was still wearing her shoes, and inside her coat pocket was a note. It was written on a piece of paper torn from her school notebook. It said, "This is tantamount to my insensitivity to people, especially women. I will admit the others when you catch me if you can. Freeway Phantom." The word tantamount caught detectives' attention, as it was formal and not a word most people used. After this, almost a year passed, and then yet another victim was killed. Then, out of nowhere, the murders just stopped. The investigation pulled in every major law enforcement agency, DC Police, Maryland Police, and even the FBI. But it soon became one of the most frustrating unsolved cases. Files went missing, evidence was mishandled, and every promising lead fell apart. Detectives interviewed hundreds of suspects, and one inmate even claimed to know who had committed one of the Freeway Phantom murders and shared details only the killer would know under the agreement of remaining unidentified. But when a politician told the story to the press, the inmate shut down and refused to talk again. Years later, suspicion fell on a man named Robert Elwood Askins, who had a long and disturbing past. He poisoned prostitutes with whiskey laced with cyanide, killing one, and days later stabbed another woman to death. He was declared insane and sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the same hospital near where the first victim had been found. After his release, he murdered again and was later convicted of more assaults. Also, when police searched his home, they found court papers in which a judge had used the word tantamount, the same unusual word from the killer's note. Co-workers also said Askins liked to use that word often. But even with all that, no physical evidence linked him to the Freeway Phantom murders. Askins denied everything, saying he could never do such things, and he spent the rest of his life in prison for other crimes and died there in 2010. More than 50 years later, the Freeway Phantom case is still unsolved. A $150,000 reward still stands, and the case remains open. The vending machine killer. A man in the city of Fukuyama picked up what looked like a free drink on top of a vending machine, an Aronaman C energy beverage, and took a few sips. A month later, he was dead. The drink had been poisoned with paraquat dichloride, a weed killer so strong that even a tiny amount can destroy a person's lungs, kidneys, and other organs within days. That one bottle began one of Japan's most frightening unsolved cases, the paraquat murders. At the time, paraquat was easy for anyone to buy, as people only had to say they needed it for their crops. As the months passed, more people fell ill after drinking from bottles found near vending machines. In total, 13 people died and 35 others became seriously ill. The investigation was extremely difficult. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses, and no security camera footage showing who did it. Japan had more than 5 million vending machines at the time, and it was impossible to keep an eye on all of them. The victims had nothing in common either. They were men and women, old and young, from different areas. There was no ransom note, no letter, no clue, and no explanation. It seemed like the killer murdered simply for the sake of killing. The authorities started a nationwide safety campaign. For example, in Tokyo, people received leaflets warning them about what was happening. The police never found a strong lead. The Doodler. In San Francisco, a young man known only as the Doodler hunted gay bars and nightclubs across the city. He would sit at a table sketching portraits of men on napkins or scraps of paper, using the drawings to start conversations. Not long after, those same men would be found dead, stabbed multiple times, and left near the edge of the Pacific Ocean. After multiple killings, investigators began to realize that the murderer was targeting gay men, and that the fear of police discrimination might be why the community was silent. Police eventually had a suspect, a young black man between 19 and 25 years old, tall and thin, who matched the descriptions of 3 men who had survived being attacked. Each of them had met the suspect in gay bars, and each said he had drawn their portraits before stabbing them. It looked like the case could finally be solved until all 3 survivors refused to testify in court. The reason was that in the 1970s, being openly gay in San Francisco could destroy a person's career, reputation, or safety. One survivor was a well-known entertainer, and another was a foreign diplomat, and speaking out meant being publicly outed. Without witnesses willing to testify, prosecutors had no case. The suspect, believed to be the Doodler, was never charged, and his name was never made public. Then the killing stopped out of nowhere. Some believe the Doodler moved away, others think he was arrested for another crime, or simply stopped killing as he grew older. In recent years, modern DNA testing has given the case new life, and the San Francisco Police Department reopened the investigation, offering a $100,000 reward and releasing an updated sketch showing what the Doodler might look like today, likely in his late 60s. Investigators say there is still DNA evidence that could one day reveal his identity. For now, the man who killed between 4 and 15 people remains free and unknown. The Ciudad Juárez killings. In Ciudad, Juárez, young women started disappearing. At first, people thought these were random, isolated crimes, but as the years passed, the numbers kept rising. Between 1993 and 2011, more than 500 women and girls were murdered, with most being between 12 and 25 years old. The pattern was too clear to ignore, but for years, nothing changed. Ciudad Juárez became a city living in fear. Many of the missing women worked in maquiladoras, foreign-owned factories near the border that made cheap goods for export. These jobs attracted young women from poor towns who wanted independence and a steady income, but the long walks to and from work, often through empty lots and dark roads, made them easy targets. By the late 1990s, hundreds of families were demanding answers, and international human rights groups had started calling the crisis a wave of femicides. Investigations were painfully slow, and when suspects were arrested, the stories often didn't make sense. Police were accused of being careless, corrupt, and even abusive. Many families said officers didn't search for missing women until their bodies were discovered. Some victims were misidentified, evidence went missing, and autopsies were never completed. As pressure grew in 1995, police arrested Abdul Latif Sharif, an Egyptian-born chemist who had moved to Juárez after a troubled life in the United States. He had a criminal record for sexual assaults in Florida and Texas, and when a young woman accused him of kidnapping and rape, authorities started thinking of him as the serial killer behind the Juárez murders. There were some problems, though. For example, weeks after being released on one charge, he was arrested again and convicted for a killing based on weak and later discredited evidence. The woman he was accused of murdering was later found alive, and the real victim was another woman. Also, even while Sharif was in prison, the murders continued, but officials claimed he had ordered gang members to kill for him from behind bars. Those gang members later said police tortured them into confessing. Still, Sharif remained the main suspect until he died in a Chihuahua prison in 2006, officially from heart failure. He kept saying he was innocent until the end. That meant the real killers were probably still free. By the 2000s, the world was watching, and Amnesty International accused the Mexican government of ignoring evidence and failing to protect women. In 2009, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights found Mexico guilty of discrimination and negligence in the murders of 3 young women known as the cotton field victims. The court ordered the government to reopen the investigations, compensate the victims' families, and build a memorial in their honor. However, the violence didn't stop. In 2010, a 16-year-old girl was murdered, and her mother became a symbol of courage after she protested for justice. While she was demonstrating in front of the state governor's office, she was shot and killed. Even as years passed, the killings continued, and in 2016, a mass grave was found in the nearby town of Madera, containing the remains of women murdered between 2011 and 2012. Femicides in northern Mexico remain a terrible reality to this day, and numerous groups of activists keep fighting. Many of them march through Juárez carrying pink crosses with the names of victims. Texas killing fields. This is known as one of the most chilling places in America. Along Interstate 45, between Houston and Galveston, more than 30 bodies, mostly young girls and women, have been found dead since the early 1970s. The murders began in the summer of 1971, when 13-year-old Colette Wilson disappeared after band practice. 5 months later, her body was found near Addicks Reservoir. Then, through the 1970s and 1980s, more and more young women disappeared. Most were between 12 and 25 years old. Many had been strangled, some shot, and some sexually assaulted. This is why the police struggled to find any connection between the victims, but one detail stood out. All of them had disappeared near Interstate 45. The area's isolation made it the perfect place to hide a crime. You could see the lights of oil refineries in the distance, but if someone screamed, no one would hear. The fields were surrounded by brush and swampy ground, far enough from the road that a body could remain unseen for months. For decades, police followed leads and suspects, but progress was painfully slow. There was little evidence, and the victims' remains were often too decomposed to reveal much. In 1972, officers arrested a gas station worker named Michael Lloyd Self for killing 2 girls. He confessed after long hours of questioning, but later said he had been forced and abused into saying he was guilty. The same officers who interrogated him were later convicted of mistreating prisoners, but Self's conviction stayed in place. He died in prison in 2000, and only afterward did officials admit they thought he was probably innocent. Another major suspect was Edward Harold Bell, a known predator who lived near the beaches where several victims were last seen. In 1978, he killed a young man who tried to stop him from exposing himself to a group of girls, then fled the country for years before being captured. From prison, Bell wrote letters claiming he had murdered 11 young girls in the 1970s, including some of the Texas killing fields victims, but he was never charged with those crimes, and his confessions were never proven true. He died in 2019, taking his secrets with him. Other suspects appeared over the years, and in the 1990s, new victims began to emerge. 13-year-old Crystal Jean Baker was found strangled near the Trinity River, and years later, DNA from her clothes matched a man named Kevin Edison Smith, who was convicted in 2012. Around the same time, 3 girls were killed by another man, and decades later, DNA evidence and his own confession linked William Lewis Reese to their murders. He was sentenced to death in 2021. This leaves many stories unfinished. Several women and girls who went missing near the I-45 corridor have still never been found, and even with new technology, DNA testing, and confessions, no one knows how many killers operated along that stretch of highway or how many victims there truly were. If you want to discuss this video or suggest an idea for the next one, join my Discord, link in the description.